The commotion in the place was great. People came and went, and from a distance, one could hear the angry shouts of a clearly angry man. Claire and Sherry looked at each other. Both had tried, but at the same time, felt somewhat worried looks on their faces. They had finished their Terra-safe tasks, and had been less than an hour and a half since they had returned from their last mission, when Claire received a call about Chris. The older Redfield stormed into the BSA headquarters and violently beat up Lansdale. He didn't only kill the man because Jill, O'Brien, and Parker held him down, along with several FBC guards. It was then when he showed them a file that incriminated Morgan, and by this time had spread to both BSA and FBC. Claire that walked at a brisk pace past the guards, hearing Sherry's footsteps just behind her. Soon as they entered the medical wing where Chris was, they ran their eyes off of the commotion. There were a few BSAA soldiers around, all with guns circling the monster and that Chris at the moment. Jill was right beside him, trying to calm down while Parker was lying on a stretcher further down the hall, with arms behind his head, making a point of ignoring everything that's been going on, if it wasn't his problem, much less involving him in a way. Well, he kind of didn't need to do much with Chris being in that state. "Chris, for God's sake, calm down. Lansdale is going to be on his way now," Jill said, trying once again. From the look on her face, it was obvious that she had been trying to calm the man down for some time, probably before they even got there. "I don't want that son of a bitch behind some iron bars. I want him dead," Chris said, even louder, trying to get past the guards, but being held back by them and a woman in front of him. Claire ran a hand through her hair in mild nervousness. Usually when Chris gets irritated, it was difficult to get him to calm down. However, in this situation was somewhat worse, since all the men who were on his team were dead. It made a total sense for him to be angry, and he was in total right. At the point of the moment, at least he had to stop screaming and threatening every daylight that crossed his path. "He's hurt," Sherry said, her eyes staring at the claw marks on the man's face. Claire did not respond, but observed the wound. The marks were still red, showing. Probably he didn't let anyone bandage him after he removed the blood-soiled bandages. However, both Sherry and Claire stared at those marks for some time, feeling somewhat uncomfortable and a little anxious, because they were very similar to the ones that had been on the chest of a young cop. Maybe it was stupid to think that way, stupid to have that sudden fear of it somehow. For some quick reason, Chris would disappear too. Claire swallowed some saliva, feeling her stomach churn for a few moments, as she was struck by the memories. It had been so long since she had thought about it, and she even had managed to delude herself into believing that she would be able to fight. Sherry seemed to go through the same thing, but unlike Claire, she recovered faster. And seeing the woman's condition, she decided to take the lead. Sherry took Claire's hand and approached it, make her way through the soldiers surrounding the man. "Chris," she called out to him, and immediately looked in her direction. He recognized and noticed the younger woman's voice. "Hey, Sherry, Claire," he noticed them, seeming to calm down for a few moments, seeing them there. Somewhat surprised, especially terrified. Afraid of what? They didn't know that they were suspicious after all. Who was to say that Lansdale was the only corrupt person in FBCA? And it was the case, they would be in a good way to inflict pain on him. Not only that, but who's to say that there would be no corrupt people in the BSAA itself? That incident on the ship made Chris and Jill open their eyes to this. The enemy could be closer than they imagined. We knew what happened. It's okay for you both to be angry, Chris, but for the moment you have to calm down. It's not going to solve everything to be screaming and yelling at the wrong people," Claire said, placing a hand gently on her brother's shoulder, avoiding looking at the injury, concentrating on the only look him in the eye. Chris made an annoyed grimace and clenched his fists tightly. He wanted the most part was to get out of that room and break Morgan's neck with his bare hands. However, the part he had been always weaker relation to Claire made his thinking somewhat came back. Although he hadn't calmed down much, he had concentrated on how he would go telling the news to families of soldiers who had died. That idea he felt worse. With an annoyed grunt, he sat down on the bed and rested his arms on his thigh, while the other hand went through his short hair. Sherry and Claire looked at each other. The older one gave a glance at Jill, who, despite having asked Chris to calm down, just seemed just as annoyed as he was. The people around seemed to relax as they saw Chris calm down, although there was no hesitation amongst those present. Claire clasped both of her hands over her body for a few moments, and briefly unsure of what to do. She hated seeing her brother like this. She never knew exactly what to do, or say. Then slowly she knelt down in front of him. She knew that his team had been wiped out, and that his mission had been a failure and a success at the same time. She just couldn't know the exact details. "So can you tell me exactly what happened?" she asked in a soft voice. Chris didn't look at her for a few moments, until he raised his head and ran his serious eyes over the place. People knew Chris, or at least had heard enough about his manner, and practically already knew that they had better get out of there. When all those people left the room, after someone told Jill that they would be around, she sighed again. The mission was a trap. Morgan was keeping in touch with that frickin' terrorist, sending us to our deaths. Terra Gercha and the attacks, all that shit at the T-Abyss. He has involvement with all this bullshit, Chris said, practically spitting out words as he felt the anger return and his face run through his fierce through his veins. Jill put a hand on his shoulder, although he didn't directly look at her. He clicked his tongue and imagined the face that she was making. An annoyed face, sure, but with that serious tone she always maintained. "Morgan, wait. Morgan, the FBC head?" Sherry asked. She was a member of Terra Safe, and she had to take knowledge of such an important figure such as Morgan. "That bastard indeed," Chris said, shaking his head. Claire blinked a few times. Out of all the things he could say, that she was not expected. I'm sorry, but not to doubt you, Chris, but do you have proof? Morgan is just simply not anyone," Claire said. All since they had just arrived. They still didn't know what the news had already been confirmed and spread. It was then that Jill acted. She handed a small tablet to the woman, who checked the device for a few moments. "Holy shit," Claire said softly, causing Jill to snort, a shearing smile rising on her lips. "Tell me about it. I'm still having trouble believing it," she said, crossing her arms. "Parker's already started acting. I even sent a copy on everything to that tablet to him. The guys will take care of everything," she said, taking a seat right next to Chris, who had just snorted in disgust. It was rather obvious that he wanted to take care of Morgan personally. "How did you guys get this? Did you spy on him?" Sherry asked from beside Claire. "There was a guy on the ship who wore a mask with the symbol of a skull, nothing but as his identification. I have no idea where he came from, or what organization he's from. He helped us and gave us all the information," Chris replied, not hiding it clear in the despondent tone, suspicious even. "And what happened to him?" Claire asked, but with some hesitation. "We don't know. We left the ship together. Well, it took like he put something in those water bottles. When we woke up, we were off the coast of Africa in the radio with contact with Neil Fisher alone. We have no idea where he went," Jill said, hearing an annoyed grunt from Chris, which caused her to roll her eyes. "He saved our lives in my defense. I didn't think he would save the only to kill us later. There was no way I could have known," Jill said, even though Chris didn't say a word. "I'm not blaming you. Just be more careful with similar situations in the future," Chris said, a little embarrassed by the way he acted, perhaps. "Whatever it was, he was prepared, and we're still alive, so I guess it wasn't that bad," he said, before Jill could respond anyway. "Anyway, I'll look and I'll try to get some sleep, okay? If I leave now, I don't know what I can do," he said, alternating his gaze between the three women there. "Haven't you eaten anything yet?" Claire asked, leaving her tablet on the table beside her. "I'll eat something later," Chris replied, lying down on the bed, leaving his right hand over his face. Claire sighed and exchanged a few glances with Jill just before the three walked out of the room. Jill, as soon as she closed the door, lightly massaged her left shoulder. She hadn't exactly rested very well in the past few hours, not to mention that her mind was tired as her body. "You should stay inside with him, Jill. To be honest, you don't look very well," Claire said, putting both hands in her pockets in her jacket. In response, Jill just huffed slightly. "I'm fine. but the bed does look tempting right now. Really, I think I'll just eat something and go to my room, she said, starting to walk beside two women. So how was the TerraSafe mission? Claire and Sherry looked at each other. It went well, all things considered. Well, the situation is a bit of a tragedy, but we were able to help in any way we could, even though we weren't able to help everyone, Sherry said, perhaps a little sheepishly, but knowing how to hide it very well in her voice, not making it too obvious to the point where Jill would notice. But Claire could tell by the simple time Dad spent with Sherry every day. She knew the girl knew better than she knew herself sometimes. Well, that's the way things are, unfortunately, but you've done everything you can. There's no need to dwell on it, Jill said, stopping in front of the cafeteria door, still looking at the two of them. Well, if you're going to stick around, check on Chris in a few hours, will you? I'll join Parker later, Jill said in response. Claire just nodded, and the woman went their separate ways. See, I told you the same thing. I understand how you feel, Sherry, but it is what it is, Claire said, sighing slightly. She felt the same way as the girl did next to her, like she could have done more, although she knew full well that she did was in her power. Unfortunately, she didn't know how to retrieve the dead. Well, not in the nice way. I know, but you know, I don't want to lose the soldiers to die. I didn't think I want Krauser to die after all, she said, putting her hands in her pockets and glancing briefly at Claire. Of course I didn't want to either. Even with those viruses around the world, soldiers die. Unfortunately, that's something that happens a lot in military, that most people forget about or just ignore, Claire said, running her hands through her ponytail. Anyway, changing the subject. Today we discussed the possibility of you going on a solo mission, Claire said immediately. Little Sherry's eyes widened in surprise and even a little confusion. You're kidding, what? She said, not even knowing exactly what to do. Well, considering that your very well-phrased performance, this has been something that's come to a discussion. There's nothing decided, but we'll consider it an easy mission. Simply go to a location, pick up a person or something and come back. Pretty simple, huh? Claire said, smiling slightly. Of course, that's even better than a few weeks, maybe even months of work, but that's already a possibility. Sherry blinked a few times. A genuine smile was born on her lips. Well, that's the news I want to hear. Chris is going to have the heart attack, she said, and Claire laughed lightly, agreeing. Which is why we won't say anything for now, she said, having a brief wink to Sherry, who nodded in response. Claire smiled, disguising her own feelings. She barely got time to spend with her brother. She hoped that she could spend more time with him later. She hoped that she was okay, but something like that situation would affect anyone. Using the darkness of the night as camouflage, a figure among the trees, the silence was present, cut only by the slight sound of silent footsteps, breaking some small branches on the ground and crunching the foliage. Leaning his body slightly against one side after getting close enough, the man looked at the huge asylum ahead. His blue eyes ran through the security guards of the place in front of the metal gates. A few cars were leaving the area. Ordinary people had visited their loved ones who were in the place, without awareness or the idea of horrible things that might happen there. On the outside of the ordinary asylum with the stamp of the government, inside a frickin' laboratory, was experimenting on all those people. Interesting thing about the place was that the asylum was the name of a dead man. Because of this, his men didn't get much information that he wanted. The mission was simple. All were go in, get information, kill anyone involved, and destroy the lab. If there are any civilians still alive or uninfected, he would have to save them too. Ghost leaned one of his arms on his leg and watched the cars leave the place. Some of the security guards were not involved with going under the covers from the information presented to him, so he would have to take good care of them not to kill them. With the last car drove away, he approached the sides of the walls. There was a total of security guards in front of the asylum, one of them being responsible for opening the gates. In the back, there were men who worked there. They were involved in the black market. In other words, he could kill them, but he would not want to do it. Not at the moment. After cutting through the barbed wire, he jumped over the wall, ran his eyes around. He was now at the side of the front door block, where the administration was at front of the asylum. In front of him was a small plaza holding activities for the patients. Next to it was the man's ward. He squinted through the brightly lit place with a few posts when he saw some workers running towards the men's ward. Ghost hid behind some bushes and watched a man and a woman walk through the place. In the distance, directly from where he was standing, there was a site's prison for those mentally unstable. A lie, since that place used to be a place for people would be used as subjects. Ghost came out of his temporary hiding place and ran through the place, eyes alert for any movements or sounds around the camera that might catch his movement. He reached the site's hospital wall and stuck his back to the concrete. There was a window at his head right next to him, and he could hear a female voice coming from the room in question. "Here, this will make you sleep better. Are you sure you don't want to eat? You should at least get an apple," one of the nurses said to some patient, as Ghost snuck under the window, his knife present in his hand just in case. He reached the backpack of the hospital. He focused his eyes on the side of the prison a few 100 yards ahead. The path seemed clear. Not many people walking through the dimly lit place, just workers and a few security guards going about their benefit shifts or taking a break. Getting past them wasn't exactly the problem. The problem would be getting into that prison. There was no way he could get through those windows because they were all protected by iron bars, much less try to enter through the back because of the cameras. The only way to enter the prison area was to go for the high wall of the prison yard, and the only way to enter the interior of the prison was through the skylight present in the place, which led directly to the director's office, which would be a few meters away from the huge yard. Lying down on the floor, Ghost awaits for some of the security guards to pass by. The man finished smoking a cigarette and walked down towards the front door. As he approached, he placed a card in front of the panel on the wall and the metal door unlocked. As soon as the door was unlocked, Ghost snuck back, walking as quietly as possible along the side of the wall. Ghost lifted his head up and looked at the huge wall of the yard. It was too high for him to try and run up the wall. However, his eyes focused on the pipe that ran part of the wall. He could climb up to the pipe, but he knew he would have to be fast when cutting the barbed wire, or he was sure to fall. The pipe would not support his weight. He looked back, checking on that no one was in his line of sight, and quickly got into that position. With a leap, he grabbed onto the pipe and began to climb quickly, the sound of metal creaking louder than he wanted, which only motivated him to climb as fast as possible. He reached to the end of the pipe and lifted his body up and supported himself, with only his legs as he began to cut through the barbed wire. The pipe cracked again, and he felt them move a little, causing him to hurry. As soon as he could, he quickly pulled his body up, glanced at the slightly bent pipe below him. Ghost ran his eyes through the yard, locating both the director's office and the two guards in the front-only door that led to the prison, as well as a single camera that watched the over said door. Before he could jump, grabbing a small device that was on the side of the calf, device resembled a gun, and he had the green screen just above the handle. Ghost pointed his device towards the walls until he located the power board in place. The lights suddenly went out, leaving the whole place in complete darkness. Ghost jumped down and moved quickly to cross the yard to attack the metal catwalk in front of the director's office. As quickly as possible, the lights returned. He had already found himself hanging down the propelling body towards the roof of the director's office. Inside the room was a man sitting, looking at something on his cell phone. A serious posture. Some papers and files were spread onto his desk. Ghost awaited for a few moments. He knew it was time. Someone knocked in the door of the room, and the director sighed slightly before turning off his cell phone and would give it a quick, "Come in!" With one of the guards entered the room. He had a military submachine gun on his back and a pistol in his holster. Like the other guards, he was wearing a dark blue uniform with a mixed gray. "Sir, it's time. We have a little problem. The power went down for a few moments and that troublesome patient of ours just escaped his cell and attacked the guard. No big deal, but you are the one to make the decision," the guard spoke, first standing by the door watching the director rise from his chair. Curiosity about that man. He was not only the director of the prison, but was also the scientist responsible for the tests performed here. But of course this didn't matter to Ghost. The only thing that intrigued him was that this man, who went by the name of Herrick, who didn't have the identity identity confirmed anywhere. Past unknown, real name unknown. They all knew it was him, that he had involvement with the asylum. Nothing else. We have the guards take him today. We also want to take the patients in cells 18 and 27, Hurek said, walking towards the door and shutting off the light before leaving. The guard slowly opened the door and walked away. Ghost, as a precaution, waited for a few moments until he was for sure safe to move. Slowly he opened the skylight and made his way down, landing on the floor quietly and immediately walking towards the door. Ghost had managed to unlock the door with his knife, since it was one of the metal doors in that place. What a mistake. The corridor he followed was lit, with a few slats from the ceiling. There were no glass on each side, which provided as a closer view of the yard below. Ghost ran through the corridor until he caught up with the metal bar door ahead. Hurek would have probably returned there later as the place was open. The agent moved forward and finally infiltrated the prison. To his left was a prisoner's cells. To his right were the small detour, inaccessible to the prisoners, that was to make his way to the cafeteria that led to the yard. He didn't even know the entrance of the laboratory was, but he already knew that they would have to take the patients there at some point. All he knew he had to do was to follow Hurek and his guards. He moved quickly to the left, and his eyes briefly ran around the place. The cells, unlike an ordinary prison, were totally enclosed, with electrical metal doors, with openings only for those outside be able to come and see the cell, and for food to be delivered in trays and delivered to them by below. Great! It was meant he was less likely to be spotted by any prisoners. However, he would not keep moving that long exposed walkway. The ancient then took a leap on the railing and jumped, holding on to the bar of the doors. That way he could move around in various iron beams throughout the place, without worrying too much about being seen. The lighting was dim. They certainly didn't see him without a flashlight. Ghost watched as some guards dragged a man through the straitjacket and forced him to lie down on the stretcher, tying his legs and neck down. The man grunted fiercely, shaking his head as he tried futilely to get rid of the gag that covered his mouth. The blood dripped from his forehead. He didn't look that old, maybe in his 30s, 40s at most. From separate cells, guards brought in 2 other prisoners, all of them restrained by straitjackets and tied to stretchers. Unlike the first men, they were not struggling as much, although awake and grunting. Ghost watched motionless as the group of armed guards, considering of 5 men and 3 women, walked down to the corridor to a double door. The ancient quietly climbed down from the rafters and watched the corridor as they passed by, following them with extreme caution. It would be easy for him to be spotted if he was completely exposed. After a few moments of extreme discomfort, Ghost stopped and pressed his back against the edge of the wall when he saw that the group had also stopped. Leaning his body slightly to the side, he watched as the guards unlocked 2 large metal doors and opened them, giving a passage to the men pushing on the stretcher. 6 of the 8 people went through the doors, and the 2 remained to watch them, a man and a woman for their stature and physical size. Ghost went back to his hiding and scanned the place quickly. To his left of the corridor that led down the corridor that took him directly towards the 2 guards. If he even stepped a few inches to the left, he would be seen. No chance to sneak around. To his right, he could hear another corridor led straight to the control room, with guards taking turns, and further on. On the changing room, at least 3 other guards by their voices. Snapping the bones of his neck, he picks up the device again. In the corridor visible to the 2 guards, a few meters from where he was standing, there was an iron door considering one of the largest doors he had passed. The last few minutes were wooden, and he would say it was a rather important room. From the symbol on the wall, from the memories scattered around the prison, these guys had a heavy weaponry. The agent had pointed the device towards the power panel nearby. The whole wing would be without power for a few moments, but it was more than enough. A low humming noise began to echo through the device, and the lights began to flicker, causing the 2 guards to alert themselves. Until the lights went out completely, Ghost quickly dropped the small metal device on the ground. The device rolled across the concrete until a small antenna, flashing green, appeared. The 2 guards were startled by the sudden blackout. They tried to turn on their flashlights attached to the shoulders of their vests. However, due to the confusion of both of them, the flashlights did not turn on. Control room on the wire? There's been a blackout in the West Wing. The woman tried to talk over to her radio, but to her partner's surprise, the radio was off. No matter how many times she tried, the device simply remained dead. What the fuck? Keep an eye out. This is not normal, the man said, raising his rifle, but not exactly aiming it after all. He wasn't seeing anything. What can... The woman interrupted her speech. With a low grunt, her partner turned in her direction. What the... Hey, Eli! His voice was abruptly interrupted, with a sharp pain emanated from the side of his neck. A warm liquid dripped down his shoulders. His body became lighter, and the pain slowly subsided. Ghost withdrew his knife from the guard's neck and pulled his body to the side. Not that it would make much difference wherever the bodies were hidden. It was unlikely that the guards would likely pass for a few hours, but the bodies hidden or not, any guard would find out, and Odd would have no choice but one of no one watching the doors. He snapped his neck bones again and stood in front of the doors. For good measure, the agent looked down the hall again. The lights were back on, and the device had to be thrown to the door. Must have self-destructed by now. Again, he took the device from the side of his calf and pointed at the doors. Just like the door in the back, the panel next to it burned, and the doors were unlocked. He walked through, closing both metal and doors as quietly as possible. Turning around, he briefly surveyed the long corridor with a slight decline for a few dozen meters. At the end of said corridor was a white double door with both of the windows. He had passed through the doors. He ran his eyes around. The floor was smooth and completely white. There were some metal lockers near the left wall, and some electrical wires and cables running through the right wall. The ceiling was decorated with strong lighting, ventilation tubes, and electrical wires due to the high power consumption of the place. A few meters ahead, the door on the left, in front of the corridor on the right. In the head of the same corridor he was in, the corridor which fell and curved into the right. With his pistol in his hand, he walks down the corridor and checks for the door. That room served as a changing table room, and it was empty. He continued his way, hearing the voices coming from behind him. Because of this, he turned on the corridor to the right and went straight on, until he came across an huge iron door. With that, he approached it and opened it. The place had turned out to be an office-type room. There was a large desk in front with all the white wall with some of the chairs and computers on. In the upper right corner, there was a large cabinet with some open drawers. In front, almost in the center of the room, a glass wall was separated from the office what appeared to be an observation room. Quite large, with some stretchers scattered about. To the left, a locker was in front of the desk with the computer. Ghost walked towards the computers. There was a file mentioning a patient who had some kind of different mutation. Exponential gain mass, preservation of intelligence, superhuman abilities, capacity to obey orders, a biological weapon that would follow orders, basically an asset on the battlefield for whatever future war might happen. He opened up a few more files, observing as much information as he could, as well as promising stuff he got. Something beeped. His instincts screamed. The computer flashed and his blue eyes focused on the most impersonable camera millimeters just above the screen. Shit, he muttered. He heard the beeping speed up. The agent ran backwards but rarely managed to escape the explosion that took place, sending him flying across the room. A loud buzzing sound dominated his ears. The smell of smoke was almost intoxicating. His back tingled up and pain increased for moments. The back of his vest was certainly destroyed. The agent was getting dizzy for a few moments, and the corners of his vision blurred briefly as he stood up. The door to the room opened abruptly, and the agent felt himself beginning to be lifted from the door. "Take him away for interrogation," he heard a man said, and his eyes quickly scanned the guards in front of him. 4 men, all wearing the same uniform and weaponry, made them what seemed like look-alike. One of them had a scar on his cheek, and the other one was short. One of them had hair a little too long for someone in a military-style job, and another one with a red beard. No matter what he could do to get out of that, he couldn't be captured. In one swift motion, he hits a punch to the face of the man with the scar on his cheek, who was holding him, which allowed him to move a few steps away, far enough distance to kick the rifle out of his hands out of the man and the red beard next to him, and quickly fire at the long-haired man. However, the fourth man reacted quickly and fired in his direction. Ghost grunted loudly as he felt the bullets hit his chest. He staggered heavily backwards, shattering the glass that surrounded the observation room. The agent fell and rolled on the floor, picking up his pistol and firing in the direction of the guards. He stood up. The guards got out of his line of fire quickly. The two of them raised their rifles and fired in his direction. Ghost ran towards the closet, and again he grunts as he was hit by another shot, this time in the leg, which caused him to fall, but briefly relieved that he was able to stay in cover. Ghost's eyes widened as he reacted almost on instinct. The man pulls the trigger, and the agent kicks him to the side of his arm with his side, causing the bullets to pierce through the concrete beside him. The noise was loud, and the buzzing sound echoed briefly through his ears. However, when he recovered quickly and kicked the man's knee, causing him to kneel on the stricken knee, not wanting him to have any time to recover, Ghost hits a punch to his attacker's face and grabs his knife, trying to stab the guard in the stomach. The bearded man grabbed his forearm and landed a strong punch to his face, so strong that not only dislocated his nose, but it also caused his head to hit the ground, leaving him temporarily stunned. This was certainly no ordinary punch. Just one blow and the agent was almost knocked out. The guard then grabbed the pistol from the agent and threw it away, immediately trying to restrain him. Ghost recovered before this happened. After headbutting the guard in the nose, he grabbed his head and threw it against the ground. The sound of bone hitting the concrete echoed loudly, along with the guard's cry of pain. But due to the agent's surprise and dismay, that didn't seem to be much for the man, who fit in rage grabbed him by the vest, who literally threw him towards a wall with one hand. Ghost grunted as he fell to his back, collided with the metal locker. Before he could do anything, he was forced to dodge a strong punch from the guard. He watched slightly, as startled as the man's fist goes through the metal of the locker. The soldiers were definitely no ordinary humans. Feeling his heart beating faster, the agent kicked the side of the man's leg, making him lose his balance, and quickly he grabbed his head, stabbing one of his fingers into the man's eyes, who screamed loudly in pain while his other hand grabbed onto the pistol he had and shot the other guards. He shot at the short guy and the one with the scar. However, the long-haired guard shot up again in his direction, hitting him in the vest and shoulder, causing Ghost to drop the gun and grunt in pain. This gave the bearded man an opportunity to land a punch to the face and hurl him towards the center of the room, where the agent was hit with a powerful straight to the face, causing the lower body to be thrown forward due to the speed which he was moving. Ghost fell to the ground, blood staining his mask and running down his neck, and before he could do anything, he felt the air being expelled from his lungs as he was kicked in the stomach. The kick was so strong that he dragged along the ground. The man with the scar held him up by the neck before he could even realize what was happening. "Give up and the pain stops. Real simple," he said, looking deep into the agent's eyes. However, to his surprise, he reacted. Ghost landed a strong punch towards the guard's mouth, causing the grip on the guard on his neck to loosen. Then he grabbed the man's vest and pulled him towards him, headbutting his opponent and finishing the left punch. Ghost gasped and rolled his body to the side, dodging a kick from the shorter guard. With the momentum of his movement, he spun his body around and tripped the guard, causing him to fall to the ground and be totally unprotected by the strong kick to his face. The agent spun his body again and got on his knees as he knew something in his direction of the long-haired guard. As soon as he saw what it was, he tried to react, but it was too late. A flash of explosion across the room, temporarily blinding all the guards. The long-haired guard shook his head in surprise and tries to open his eyes. He couldn't very well see, but what little he could do. He only saw a knee flying towards his face. The impact was extremely strong for them both in surprise from his vulnerability. Ghost fell on top of the guard and quickly grabbed his knife into the man's neck. As soon as he did so, he picked up his pistol from the floor and fired it at the short guard who was trying to get up. The man with the scar ran towards him, turning his body and dodging one shot, kicking the gun out of the agent's hand before pressing him against the wall. As soon as he did, however, the agent fought back with the elbow back to his knee and to his stomach, causing the grip around his torso to loosen. Ghost then circles the man's neck with his arm and throws himself to the ground, causing the man to fall headfirst onto the concrete. The red-bearded guard shot in his direction, but Ghost was quicker and used the guard's body as a shield, grabbing his pistol and shooting at the man as soon as possible. Realizing the opening, Ghost stood up and focused his eyes on the shorter man running towards him. The guard tried a slide punch, but Ghost dodged it as he ducked and countered with a punch to the man's stomach, followed by a kick to the side of his leg, which brought him to his knees, and finally took a punch to the face, sending him to the ground. The bearded guard suddenly appeared, ignoring the pain and shots, and landed a powerful punch to the side of Ghost's face, causing the agent to stagger backwards, crashing into what was left of the computer tables and the table. The guard would not let him recover it and attacked him again. However, Ghost dodged that punch, grabbed the man by the neck with the head, and pressed him against the table, causing his temple to rest against the cold surface, while his mouth hung in the air. With that, Ghost delivered a powerful punch to the guard's mouth, and the sound of breaking nose echoed through the room. The guard fell to the ground, with his hand over his deformed mouth, but before he can even do anything, Ghost stabbed his knife to the side of his neck, kicking him in the ground shortly after. But the agent was taken by surprise, and shortly after that he gasped again, groaning loudly in pain as he felt his back being pierced by 2 shots. He then fell to the ground, feeling his body numb for a few moments. His pupils dilated, and his breathing became stronger and stronger as his heart beat faster and faster. Somewhat staggering, he stood up and turned to the short man and quickly ran towards him, ignoring the shots that hit his vest. Ghost landed a strong kick to the man's head, then knelt it on his torso and began to punch the guard violently. Quick, brutal, vicious punches. And the more Ghost hit, the more he felt like he could just keep hitting, until the man's face was all disfigured, blood stained the floor and both bodies, both the inert and the gasping. Ghost blinked a few times, his breathing still rapid. The adrenaline through his body had begun to recede. He felt the consequences of his actions. His whole body ached, as he was beginning to have difficulty breathing. His knuckles were raw from the uncontrolled punches. There was something Walter had warned him about. The adrenaline in his body, due to what few remained of the virus in his body, not only drastically increased his reflexes, but also increased his physical capabilities to a level above the ordinary. But as a consequence, it could not do damage to his body. He let himself fall to the side, his breathing became ragged as he began to tremble a bit. His trembling hands went to the side of his blood-stained vest, and he took a mixture of herbs, drinking it quickly and waiting for the effect to begin. It wouldn't be fully enough to heal himself, but there were still some bullets inside his body. But there was still a mission to complete. He still felt mentally better. He stood up a little groggy and dizzy, but had managed to stand, only to be sent to the ground after being hit by a blow at the back of the head. His consciousness was leaving him. His body had become so much heavier. Shit, he would be captured, but at least that was the best. At worst, he could have been killed. If he somehow wondered if he got out alive, at least he got a name. Frederick Drowning. He would be anxious to see what such an important figure in WP Corporation had to say about some information he had discovered. Of course, that is, if he lives long enough for such thing.